I don't think there's any way that we can pretend that this isn't an Israeli operation, that Epstein was working for
or they were
Israel.
involved in it. I think there's no question. One that I just saw recently was that he was speaking about Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, his good lady friend and accomplice. And so somebody he knew very, very well. And he said that actually Robert Maxwell had threatened Mossad. He said, like, if you try to do anything to me or, restrain my activities, because I guess he was kind of a wild character and had a lot of women and just lived life to the excess, let's say. And it's probably something that made Mossad nervous. But he threatened Mossad. He said, well, I'll tell them, everything I know about you, all the things that I've done for you. If you go after me. Now, in the end, he died under mysterious circumstances. So maybe it was Mossad finally said that this guy is getting, he's out of control or something. But clearly, he was working for Mossad. And if which was always suspected, it was always strongly suspected. And if Robert Maxwell is working for Mossad, here we got Ghislaine Maxwell, and they've just there's virtually no distance between Jeffrey Epstein and Robert Maxwell.
Yeah, well, I think, if we just take a step back and look at it, it was a dump of 3 million pages. I'm sure some of it might be fake and, something, a distraction or whatever. But what we can just say is that clearly our government is compromised. Not just the U.S. government, the Western world is compromised. This whole conspiracy theory that we were ruled by an elite evil cabal, a pedophile cabal, is turning out to be true. It seems like there are so many people that have dirt, that have been blackmailed by Epstein, by Israel. And it's amazing when you see our Congress, 535 members of Congress, and there's like 4 that are trying to push this out, and everybody else is silent. It just shows that the control is total. And it's not just, our Congress and our politicians. It's, the media, Hollywood, just all the elites, musicians, artists, anything. It's just sick. I don't know what we do. How do we move forward now that this is out in the open?
Yeah.
And it's only half of it. This is only half of the files that have been released.
Yeah. Again, I wouldn't put it all down to Mossad, the CIA, and compromising material, to explain Congress's behavior. But I'm sure it's part of it. It's probably a significant part of it. For a lot of people, just plain out money. They're just bought early on, or they're groomed in different ways. They develop a relationship with Israel.
I think you're being naive, Dad. Yeah. I think we're at this point now where it's like it's not just about the money. There's more here. I think I
agree. I'm sure there's more than the money, but I think the money is a big part of it. You use whatever tools. If you're an intelligence agency like Mossad, you just use whatever tools are available to you. And if this person could be bought, you just buy him, right? But this other person, okay, well, we know this about, he's got these certain we know he has certain skeletons in his closet. Let's put it that way, and we'll make use of those. Or we know that he likes underage women, and we'll just invite him to the island. There's just one thing or another that you can do. And they'll use any of those tools that are available to them. And I'm sure, I'm not denying that in some cases, probably in quite a few cases, a significant portion of those representatives have compromising material, and intelligence agencies, not just Mossad, but the CIA, maybe MI6, use this material, to keep them in line.
It almost feels like if they're not compromised, then, the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, they do what they can to make sure that they don't get into power. I mean, it doesn't make sense. How is it only like Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna that are pushing to get this out? Everybody's silent. And then it's also odd that how many of our just elite aren't talking about this. This is the biggest story in the world. This is huge.
Right.
And so many of these prominent people are just deflecting. I saw The Guardian put an article. It's like, oh, it must have been Russia and Putin were behind. Things like this. It's insane. Yeah. It's just I don't get it. It's disgusting. I feel like this country, our government, and Western governments in general have just lost all legitimacy. Right. How can we, how can we pay taxes to a country that is engaged in this behavior? And I think everybody has to be so furious. I'm furious, like I get worried, like, oh, I sent $600 to you or something like this. Did I record that correctly? And will I be in trouble? Well, meanwhile, these people are engaged in some of the most sickening, disgusting behavior, and they can just do it with impunity. And now it just feels like it's out in the open, and they're not even trying to. Maybe they know they can't deflect it so much anymore. Now it's just like the control is out in the open. We can see it now. What do? We have to have a revolution, right? We can't be ruled by these people.
Yeah. Well, one thing, you say that within the U.S. there isn't enough recognition of what's going on, certainly within Congress, for the reasons that we just gave. But I'm struck by how once you get outside of the so-called international community, essentially the collective West and its few of its firm allies in other regions of the world, this is big news, and a lot of people have seized on this. It's just to characterize the U.S. It's become a symbol of U.S. evil. I've noticed the Iranians do this, like Professor Morandi, but also, for example, the president of Colombia. He just talks about this pedophile regime. This is something. It's something that it kind of that has actually come to characterize again our government. It's in the minds of much of the world. There's a lot of truth to it. There's no question about it. I don't know how much, but there's a lot of truth to it. In any case, I'm kind of fine with. I don't know exactly the extent of the, of this ring or whatever, but it's there. And if that becomes a symbol that's associated, kind of like the way in which people around the world understand the evil that is residing, in the powers above us here in the U.S. and in the collective West. Maybe that's, that works. It's just people have to be aware that there's something very wrong, and the rest of the world sees it and is using, this again as I think is at least a symbol. It's more than a symbol. I know that, but it just is a way to acknowledge the evil, that reigns above us.
Well, what do we do as citizens that live in this country? And there is we're realizing that this is true, that we are ruled by truly evil people that don't care about us, that they are in this evil cabal, and they engage in the most depraved behavior imaginable. Right. And they just rob from American people. Everything we've been told about our country is a lie. Just everything, like we pay high taxes here in the U.S., but we're all about capitalism, but we pay high taxes and we get no benefits. We have to pay out the nose for college education. We don't get any health care. We're like, yes, America, the land of the free, where we have the most incarcerated people per capita here. And just everything doesn't make sense. Media control. I feel like market manipulation, just everything is done by these elites. And we are $38 trillion in debt. We spent over $8 trillion on Israel's war of terror, and it's this, we've been robbed blind. We have nothing. Our culture has been destroyed. Our civilization has been destroyed. The West has just entered into this sort of general depravity. And part of me, I'm just almost wondering, like, I start to wonder, even this depravity, was that in itself, was that manufactured, or at least very least encouraged by this elite, because they're engaged in such horrific behavior. There was this, I remember a couple of years ago, I saw that there were some articles talking about pedophiles as minor attracted persons. Like, what the hell is that about? And then starts to say, OnlyFans, that's empowering for women. All these porn sites are owned by Jewish rabbis and things like that. It's just, you start to I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? What is going on? I don't know if I've just gone it's not full blown conspiracy. We can't be upset enough now. I just feel like everything that the whole Western civilization has been almost intentionally destroyed, and we've been robbed blind, and we've just been fed a lie because the elite have just been able to create this Truman Show for us, this narrative for us that just completely falls. And I think everybody's starting to see it, and just, you can go down so many routes. You start to question JFK, 9/11, Charlie Kirk. Wait a second. What is going on here? What is going on? Now we're about to go to war with Iran? Wait, why? It just doesn't make sense. So what do we do? Do We got to start marching towards DC. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think it's the time is ripe for revolution yet. But as we're saying, this is really what this is all about. I think this elite that is actually less secure than they have been forever. I mean, the current the elite, let's say, call them the post-World War II elite. And part of what has made them, has weakened their grip on power and is going to number their days is the fact that we can see them. We can see them much more clearly than we could in the past. And, that is actually not a sign of strength. They may pretend, adopt a brave pose and say, I don't care, but that weakens them. It's better when you can operate behind the scenes, isn't it? And now it's increasingly coming out in the open. Yeah, well, I would say, yeah, this is all real. I'm not going to say that the Epstein isn't important. For me, it's like the horror in Gaza above all that is, which really condemns.
But why is that happening?
West. Yeah.
It's because of this. It's all connected, right?
Well, there is. I think there's no question. Again, we've talked about the Mossad connection, and that's real. That is there to some extent. It's quite important. It's true, and just the corruption of the elite. Again, that's right. That's true. Right. They are connected. That's fair.
Why isn't it in America's interest to fund a genocide in Gaza?
Right.
Why? It isn't. It's because the elite, they are controlled. They are blackmailed. Yeah. That's what it is, right? It has to be.
Well. Again, I don't know the extent. I think that's partly true, where you have outright blackmail. I think and I don't know the extent of it. But I'm sure that's true, and that's actually probably always been true. Intelligence agencies have always done that. But I don't know what's worse, to have somebody who's outright blackmailed or somebody who's just so morally corrupt that you don't need to blackmail him and he's just fine with a genocide. And I think that's unfortunately what we see with a lot of our leaders, especially in Europe. I think these people are just moral pygmies. Clearly there is, let's say, Zionist influence in Europe, but it's not nearly what it is in the United States. But still, you see so little pushback. And quite the opposite, just very willing accomplices.
I think it's a combination of the two. I mean, this indoctrination process, like we're saying, it's still Israel Mossad that is part of this indoctrination process. Like if they do blackmail and they do the indoctrination. I mean, why do we have this humiliation ritual where every single politician has to run to Jerusalem and kiss the Wailing Wall twice a year? That doesn't make any sense. It's crazy. Right. Like what if, people were going to the Great Wall of China and kissing it? It's just
I agree.
Like, what?
It is. So we shouldn't consider that normal. That's not normal behavior. Every time I see one of those pictures, I just cringe. You say, how you don't have any self-respect.
Look, it's not even your religion.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. What are you doing? You can say, for whatever reason, you might want to support Israel. But why do you need to do this? It's just, I always find that really disturbing, to be honest. And those pictures come out all the time because you're right. It seems to be part of almost an initiation ritual for the elite in this country.
Yeah, because it seems like the gatekeepers are, these prominent Jewish scientists. And this is part of what they do. It's like, if you want to become a politician, if you want to make it into Hollywood or in the media, then you have to go through these rituals. We have to vet you and make sure that you are on our side. That's the rule. And that's why we're seeing this silence across the board, across much of the media, Hollywood, and our politicians. All are just our elite. Like, that's what it's done. So they've been able to create this barrier that if you want to succeed in this country and make it to the top, you got to kiss that wall, or we'll blackmail you. That's what it seems like what's happened.
Well, it's hard to disagree with you. And I think we can look at the exceptions, but the exceptions prove the rule. An example is Thomas Massie. Just a few days ago, Miriam Adelson donated $800,000 to unseat him, to his opponent. And that's a test, again. Here he's coming, he's from a conservative rural district in Kentucky. And, he's not backing down one bit. Not only is he, taken on the Israel lobby, but he's also been very critical of Donald Trump, in a state that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. But I think there's a good chance he's going to win. Let's hope he does, because that would be a signal that, yeah, you can. If you're just an honest person and you can defy them. So, I mean, part of it is like, yeah, we can point to this influence. That's true. I agree. It's there. It's obviously a problem. But another problem is just the moral cowardice of so many of our leaders. There's so few people like Thomas Massie that are simply, are going to stand out there and say, no, I'm not going to do this. And again, that was true of Ron Paul. It was true of Walter Jones when he turned very strongly against the wars in North Carolina. And their people, again, conservative, Republican districts, they stood by him. And it just shows, okay, yeah, it's not like this is a control that they just cannot, resist. They're willing accomplices. Again, these are moral cowards, and they say, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. Yeah, genocide, right. Yeah, as long as you send me that check. These are the kind of people that they are.
Yeah, well, you mentioned two people that are the past 20, 30 years,
yeah,
right?
Tom, but even so, they are exceptions that prove the rule. That it's just that, they prove the rule that there is that influence because there's so few of them. But also prove that you can fight them, but there's so few of our political elites, anybody in the the political system, that is actually principled and willing to do that.
Yeah, we need to throw our weight behind somebody like Thomas Massie. The people need to rally behind him, Ro Khanna. There's just you're right, it's just so few. And
right,
one of the I don't know if I'm sure you probably saw this, but the most sort of one of the most damning lines in the Epstein files regarding Trump was this one that said, from an FBI document that said, Trump has been compromised by Israel and Kushner is the real brains behind his organization. That essentially this whole thing, the Trump organization, the Trump presidency, the movement, the whole MAGA movement, it was just a psyop. It's just, and it makes sense. I mean, he was a TV personality. It's like they're actors on a stage, and the true masters of the universe are behind directing everything. And that's what it is. It's just so sick. They're all these people are compromised, and it makes you wonder, like, why did this leak happen now as well? We've been seeing these Epstein leaks in drips and drabs. Now we had a big one, and it's like, are they telling Trump, like, hey, he's not towing the line. Here's a little bit more. Here's a little bit more. We got this big armada outside of Iran. We got to make a move, Trump. And then all of a sudden it comes out,
Right. You may be right. You just might be right. I don't know. It's certainly possible. It's certainly possible.
I think we need a revolution. We need something. I don't know what to do. I don't know what we can do, but it's at least people know.
Right. There's really not much you can do as an individual. But speaking about it like we are is doing something. Shining a light on it is doing something. The light is something that they fear. They would rather be in the dark. And the fact that they've been exposed, I think, again, weakens them. And then at the same time, we've talked about, that's part of the soft power. Again, it's just like under Trump, American soft power has diminished tremendously. And again, that, so I guess what I'm saying is that, what we can do, like what we do here, that we're trying to shine our own little tiny bit of light on that, and to diminish this soft power that supports American-led Western hegemony. That's something that we can do. And at the same time, we know that these other processes taking place. There's especially economic decline. There will be an economic crisis, in the not too distant future, and that will be another blow. In the end, it's going to collapse from within, I believe, more than anything else. And hopefully, what we can just hope for is that we have people like Thomas Massie, to lead to form an alternative, to lead us to, a republic and not an empire. But I worry, who knows? It's just like when you enter into a period of chaos like this, it's just like all kinds of crazy movements pop up. And we'll see what happens.